The human brain evolved to process information at an accelerating velocity, eventually encountering a strict mechanical limit, the physical body. This graph plots two timelines of development. Along the bottom, our capacity for somatic regulation remains strictly linear. Above it, cognitive processing speed curves exponentially upward. Mental capacities like imagination and anticipation accelerated far beyond the physical body's capacity to adapt in real time. The physical system is left in a state of chronic delay. It anticipates future threats and desires complex outcomes that it cannot physically resolve in the present moment. This structural mismatch forces the human physiological system to generate massive quantities of internal emotional energy and aggression, but provides the organism no equal avenue for kinetic, bodily discharge. We define this trapped, unmetabolized experience as affective potential. When affective potential builds up without a clear biological or behavioral discharge channel, the human nervous system becomes chronically flooded. This structural mismatch, a brain running ahead of the body's metabolic capacity, represents a profound evolutionary flaw at the root of modern psychological suffering. Traditional clinical interventions often fail to resolve this tension because they treat it as a failure of logic or a lapse in willpower. Biological, cultural, and psychological development does not move in a straight line. Instead, it relies upon a repeating three-stage architectural scaffold system. The mind progresses through evolution, disrupts in revolution, and settles into involution. In the mid-20th century, psychoanalyst Hyman Spotnitz developed a specific clinical methodology designed to force integration across these three distinct psychic stages. Spotnitz treated psychoanalysis not as a literary exercise of decoding a patient's secrets, but as a systematic method for neuroaffective regulation. Achieving psychic maturity requires deliberately guiding a patient's flooded nervous system through this tripartite architecture, moving the brain from raw chaos into structural self-containment. The first stage is evolution. In the psychological sense, this is the slow, outward-facing accretion of neural pathways, learned skills, and adaptive strategies. This phase successfully builds a functional self. Eventually, however, the accumulation of internal pressures exceeds the structural capacity of these early neural templates. This triggers revolution. It is a disruptive, often violent phase where the old architecture cracks and fails under the weight of accumulated affective potential. This cross-section of the human brain shows the exact biological mechanism of this phase, the amygdala hijack. During a hijack, the brain's ancient threat detection system fires so rapidly that it completely overrides the cortical systems responsible for judgment, context, and impulse control. The individual is no longer choosing their behavior. They become completely identified with their own state of biological activation. Clinically, this manifests as unfiltered rage, severe panic attacks, somatization, or a complete blockage of the patient's ability to process and discharge their feelings. Revolution is a state of severe biological crisis. Neurological speed has entirely overridden cognitive wisdom, leaving the patient trapped in raw intensity. Classical Freudian analysis relies heavily on interpretation and cognitive insight. The classical mechanism of cure depends on translating unconscious conflict into conscious awareness, using the discharge channel of speech, what Freud called the talking cure. Yet, this exact mechanism consistently fails for patients suffering from severe pre-Oedipal or narcissistic pathologies. The failure is mechanical. The discharge channel of speech is preemptively blocked by the patient because their nervous system has learned to anticipate relational danger when speaking. When the nervous system is flooded, these patients lack the functional symbolic architecture required to process complex interpretations. To a brain undergoing an amygdala hijack, logical interpretation does not feel like helpful insight. It feels like an active attack. Offering symbolic interpretation to a brain trapped in revolution is a clinical error. The patient must first survive the intense physical experience of their emotions before they possess the architecture to understand them. Hyman Spotnitz bypassed the search for insight entirely. He diagnosed the severe distress of these patients as an inability to regulate affect. This flowchart contrasts the two approaches. Spotnitz rejected the classical view of aggression as an innate death drive seeking destruction. He viewed it simply as unmetabolized developmental energy seeking a physical outlet. Through this lens, the narcissistic defense is a structural attempt to manage the neuropsychic gap. Spotnitz utilized a hydraulic model. Because the outward expression of aggression feels too dangerous, the psyche redirects that undischarged energy inward, attacking the self. This inward attack is actually a protective measure. It is designed to keep the necessary external object, like a parent or an analyst, safe from the patient's overwhelming affective charge. The Spotnitzian clinical intervention demands that the analyst shift their role from providing interpretation to providing containment. Using a technique called joining, the analyst matches the patient's revolutionary speed and intensity, providing active regulation without forcing premature wisdom. The clinician functions as an external somatic regulator. They safely bleed off the pressure of trapped affective potential until the patient's brain achieves enough stability to reflect. This brings us to the final architectural stage, involution. It is the necessary, stabilizing aftermath of revolution. Involution is the deliberate inward reorganization of affect. Energy concentrates to digest and integrate what the body and mind have just experienced. The psyche achieves a state of internal self-containment, possessing the structural capacity required to stabilize its own experience. This brain scan visualizes the specific neurobiological correlate of this stage, the integration of the default mode network. This network is highly active during rest, reflection, and self-referential meaning-making. Activating this network allows the brain to accurately contextualize internal danger, effectively shutting off the amygdala hijack. Achieving integration in the default mode network allows a patient to permanently metabolize the gap between their cognitive acceleration and their lived somatic experience. This table maps the complete trajectory of the Spotnitzian clinical architecture. The final endpoints of the involution stage establish a state of inward integration and contained affect. The objective of the clinical process is distinct from mere emotional catharsis or simple discharge. It focuses on the systematic conversion of stored affective potential into regulated, maturational communication. Practically, this produces a patient who can feel the full physical force of their own activation without being overwhelmed or destroyed by it. By utilizing this tripartite architecture, modern psychoanalysis successfully bridges the neuropsychic gap, harmonizing the evolutionary speed of the human brain with the profound stabilizing wisdom of the physical body.